My grandfather was born into an Iceland with no road connecting the country together, no television, and almost none of what actually defines this place today. If I dropped him into Reykjavik right now with no explanation, I do not think he would recognize it as the same country he grew up in, and that is not an exaggeration for effect. It happened within one lifetime, his lifetime, and I do not think most people, including a lot of Icelanders my age, actually understand how recent and how total that change really was. Before I go further, I want to be upfront about something. This channel is not built around fast cuts or flashy editing, and it never will be. What I am offering you instead is something slower. Information I have actually taken the time to get right, because my goal here is not to entertain you for a few minutes and disappear. It is to help you understand the values of the country I grew up in, one I am genuinely proud to be from. If that is the kind of channel worth sticking around for, subscribing helps more than you would think, and it takes about 2 seconds. Alright, let's get into it. Start with something as basic as roads. It sounds almost unbelievable now, but there was no single road connecting the entire country together until 1974. Before that, getting from one coastal region to another, places that are now a straightforward few hours apart by car, could mean an entirely different kind of journey, sometimes by sea, sometimes a long detour around the island, rather than a direct route, because the direct route simply did not exist as a finished road yet. My grandfather remembers that gap closing, remembers the specific bridge that finally completed the loop around the country, opened in 1974 to mark 1,100 years since the island was first settled. Before that bridge, an entire stretch of glacial rivers and sand in the southeast had cut the ring road in half for as long as anyone could remember, and getting past it meant waiting for a very particular window of low water, or not going that way at all. Even after that bridge opened, most of the ring road was still gravel rather than pavement, which people outside Iceland rarely believe when I tell them. It took decades longer, well into the 21st century, before the entire loop around the country was finally fully paved. My grandfather drove long stretches of it as gravel for most of his adult life, dust and loose stone the whole way, and he still seems mildly amused every time he takes a smooth paved corner, now that used to rattle the whole car for an hour at a time. Television arrived almost as late, and for a strange reason that still says something about how this country thinks. The state broadcaster did not begin broadcasting until 1966, years after most of the rest of Europe already had regular programming. It was not a matter of technology being unavailable. It was closer to a genuine national debate over whether television represented a kind of cultural invasion, something that might dilute the language and traditions of a small, isolated population. Households had already started buying television sets to pick up American Armed Forces broadcasts years before Iceland's own service even launched, which tells you the appetite was there long before the country agreed to formally supply it. My grandfather talks about getting the family's first television the way some people talk about getting their first car. A genuine milestone, an event the whole extended family gathered around. For the first years, broadcasts only ran a few hours a day, a few days a week. He remembers entire evenings built around whatever those few scheduled hours happened to be, which is such a strange thing to picture now, in a house where the television never really turns off and streaming means something is always available, instantly, on demand. There was one detail he brought up that has stuck with me more than almost anything else in this story, which is that Thursdays had no broadcast at all for years, an entirely deliberate, government-mandated day off from television, originally meant to encourage people to read, visit each other, or simply do something other than sit in front of a screen. He remembers Thursday evenings as genuinely different from the rest of the week growing up, quieter, more social. Almost a small weekly ritual the whole country shared without anyone having to coordinate it. It sounds almost impossible to imagine now, an entire nation collectively screen-free for one evening a week, by law. It went further than just Thursdays, too. For years, the entire month of July had no television broadcasts at all, nationwide, since that was when most people took their summer holidays, and the small broadcasting staff needed the break as much as anyone. The Thursday policy alone lasted until 1987, and there is an old joke my grandfather still repeats. that an unusual number of people in his generation seemed to have been born roughly 9 months after a Thursday, since there was, quite literally, nothing else to do. Phones followed a similarly slow, uneven path. For a long stretch of his childhood, rural households often shared a single line between multiple families, meaning you could sometimes pick up the receiver and hear a neighbor's conversation already in progress, and everyone simply understood the etiquette of hanging up and waiting your turn. My grandfather still finds it a little astonishing that I carry a device in my pocket capable of reaching almost anyone on Earth instantly, when he remembers a version of this same country where reaching the next town over sometimes meant waiting for a shared line to free up. Electricity itself did not reach every corner of the country evenly either, and this is a part of his childhood he describes almost matter-of-factly, the way you would describe weather rather than hardship. Rural electrification stretched out over decades, farm by farm, valley by valley, well into the middle of the 20th century, which meant his own household's relationship with electric light, refrigeration, and eventually that first television, was staggered years behind households in Reykjavik that had access to all of it much earlier. Being from the countryside here, even relatively recently, meant living on a genuine delay behind the capital, in a way that has almost completely disappeared today. The country's global reputation shifted just as dramatically within his lifetime, something I have gone into in more detail elsewhere on this channel, but it is worth restating briefly here because it is part of the same story. He grew up in a country almost nobody outside it had any reason to think about at all, and he has lived long enough to watch it become one of the most talked about, most visited places on the planet, discussed in the same breath as some of the wealthiest and happiest countries in the world. Healthcare and daily survival change just as much, even if it gets talked about less than roads or television. Infant mortality, which had been a real and constant fear for his parents' generation, dropped dramatically within a few decades, as modern medical care actually reached rural parts of the country. Life expectancy climbed steadily enough that it is now among the highest anywhere in the world. He does not talk about this part with nostalgia at all, unlike some of the other changes. He is simply, plainly grateful that it happened before it affected his own children. What actually gets to me most, when he talks about all of this, is not any single piece of technology or infrastructure. It is watching him walk through Reykjavik now, past hotels full of tourists speaking languages he does not recognize, past restaurants serving food he never had access to as a child, past a skyline that simply did not exist in any form when he was young, and seeing him take all of it in not with confusion, but with a kind of quiet, ongoing amazement that has apparently never fully worn off, even after living through the entire transformation himself, 1 year at a time. He tells one story more than any other from that side of things, about the first time he saw an escalator, on a work trip to Reykjavik, as a young man from a rural area where nothing like that existed anywhere nearby. He describes standing at the bottom of it for a genuinely embarrassing length of time, watching other people step on and off with total ease, before finally working up the nerve to try it himself. He laughs about it now, but I think what he is really laughing at is the distance between that version of himself and the country he lives in today, where his own grandchildren have never known a world without one. I asked him once whether it felt strange, having grown up in one country and now living, in every practical sense, in a completely different one, without ever actually leaving. He thought about it for a while before answering, longer than he usually takes with a question like that. He said it did not feel like losing the country he grew up in. It felt more like watching it finally become something it had always been trying to become, just slowly, and later than almost anywhere else in Europe got the chance to.